Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another episode of Arkan's Archive. Today we are talking about the Adeptus Mechanicus and their lovely beefs with one another. It's AdMech Infighting time. So, first off, question: why do the AdMech fight with other factions, and why do they fight amongst themselves? Why is it that the AdMech have so much beef with so many other people? Well, let's start with the internal beef to start with. Now, the first and most obvious one is doctrinal challenges. Now, amongst more regular factions, these doctrinal challenges would be differences in operation, how they wage war, how they operate their government, how they treat their civilians, their opinion on God, things of that nature. Within the AdMech, it is a lot more dogmatic challenges. One person or one faction or one group believes one thing about the Omnissiah, about production, about materials, about God in the more cosmic sense, or even about their place within the Imperium, and another faction disagrees. Now, you'll often notice with the AdMech that these disagreements are the start to almost every single argument or problem that the AdMech have internally. These doctrinal challenges, while they are most obvious between Forge worlds, so Mars, Ryza, Gryphone, all of those have different doctrines and way of looking at themselves, the Imperium, the Omnissiah. They agree on most things, but within all of those worlds, there are many different subgenres of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And of course, between Forge worlds, they tend to consider themselves very independent and different from both one another and the Imperium at large. That is in a way that they have rivalries, long-standing problems, doctrinal differences that go back thousands of years, ones that are relatively short-lived, ones that have lasted for a long time. So while they are unified as the Adeptus Mechanicus from outsiders, on the internal side of things they are as fractious as any human population would be expected to be, especially one that relies so heavily on religious dogma. So, the next one that the internal issues have is disagreements over the forces of the Omnissiah. Now, what does that mean? Now, obviously, it can mean military. How should god machines, or titans, or knights, or any other great asset of the Adeptus Mechanicus, how it should be deployed, how it should be maintained, how it should be employed. There's often disagreements between different legios of titans about how they use their titans. Mars's Titans are going to be different from a minor Forge's Titans, and they're going to consider them very different when it comes to an asset militarily. And that's one side of things, and that's kind of something that you can hash out. They do all their numbers, and they do their prep ahead of time, and their numerical calculations on how perfect or how imperfect someone's military doctrine is, but that's not really what I talk about when I talk about the forces of the Omnissiah. I'm talking about the literal forces of God, the motive force, the galvanic force, the radioactive force, the religious attachments that the Adeptus Mechanicus give to inanimate objects, machinery, technology, various pieces of the Omnissiah's greatness, literally their tech, archaeotech priesthood. They have so many different ways of looking at these things that at some point you can have priests disagreeing over whether a light bulb or a plasma coil is considered more holy. You can have disagreements over whether the holy laser or the radioactive bullet or the plasma bolt is more glorious or more representative of the Omnissiah's grace. And while this would be an academic discussion in terms of any other faction where they're talking about it in military terms, for the Adeptus Mechanicus there is another layer to it, and that is the deeply religious dogma that comes with these decisions. Saying that a plasma bolt is better than a radioactive bullet, well, that's not just wrong from Forge World to Forge World, or even within Forge's different sects. It could also be heresy. Now, of course, the Adeptus Mechanicus throw around the term tech heresy like they're giving out free candy. However, that does not mean that they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is, and tech priests will often argue, sometimes at extreme length, as to why their view or their opinion of their religious dogma is better than even a fellow priest from the same world, or even within the same sect. They may disagree heavily. And that's not even to include the actual heretics, who go way far out there in terms of the Adeptus Mechanicus, which are a relatively conservative, anti-progressive group. They're very doctrinal purists, a majority of them, and the ones that aren't tend to get exiled and ostracized quite quickly because, well, if you don't align with anyone's dogma, everybody's going to have a problem with you. Next, moving on, is disagreements over resources and populations or deals with the Imperium. We'll get to deals with the Imperium in a minute because, of course, if Mars wants to get a contract for something and Agrippino wants to get a contract with something, or Armageddon wants to get a contract with something in the Imperium, they're going to fight it out between each other. Usually politically, and unfortunately, because of, well, not necessarily unfortunately, but unfortunately for the smaller forge worlds, it tends to be that larger forges, like Mars, like Agrippina, like Ryza, will get access to those massive contracts, arming tens of thousands of Imperial Guard regiments, all at the same time from multiple different forge locations. That's often going to fall to those bigger forges, not only because they can do it, but also because they can do it more competently. They can do it better. There's a better quality control, and there's a legacy. You have to understand, Mars is a standout, unique example among the Forge worlds. There is basically not a single other Forge in existence that truly stands up to the legacy and size of the Martian Forge. There are some that come close, and there are a few that argue that they are better in a specific area, but very few claim that they are simply superior to Mars overall, and none of them argue the religious significance of Mars. There is no religious dogma more powerful than that of the Martian Creed, and it is genuinely the bedrock upon which the Adeptus Mechanicus stand. As a result, it means that when you're in a bidding war against Mars, it might be a little bit better even for your public image among the Adeptus Mechanicus to back down gracefully before Mars has to pull out all the stops and make you disappear. Not saying that they would do anything unethical. Oh, no, no. Mars is very above the belt and would never do anything to disappear their political or economic opponents. That would never happen, of course. But, yeah, that's one of the big things. You gotta remember, big trumps small a lot within the Imperium for who gets contracts, but the other ones are more mundane disagreements. Resources is obviously a big one. The Adeptus Mechanicus own usually several different worlds of Imperial bent that are now under their purview, or working directly with them to provide the Forge with the basically infinite river of resources that they need in order to continue operation. And then, of course, what do you need in addition to resources? You need populations. Forge worlds are not great at maintaining massive populations of humans. They can maintain a mean and relatively miserable human population, but they're usually going to be dwarfed by the local Forge world as long as you're not talking about a place that's as old as Mars or as built up to the point where it has hives, like Armageddon, for example. But those are, again, those more built-up traditional forges. When we're talking about a random backworld forge world, they might have a couple of billion people on the planet, but that's not nearly enough to run the forge indefinitely, and so they have to call upon outside labor. If there is more than one forge world in a subsector, it's very likely that that labor pool is going to get very thin very quickly at certain points within the calendar imperial year, meaning that they're going to have to argue and disagree over who deserves more working hands. So that's how they argue within the Adeptus Mechanicus. What about externally? Their arguments with others. Well, with Imperials or Xenos, in some cases, the biggest problem that the Adeptus Mechanicus have with them is committing tech heresy. Now it's, again, thrown around like candy in the AdMech. Tech heresy this, tech heresy that, plain old heresy this, plain old heresy that. What does heresy mean for the Adeptus Mechanicus? And more specifically, what is tech heresy? Now, tech heresy really has a lot of gradient, and to be honest, has a ton of gray area as well. Xenos are committing tech heresy just by touching Imperial technology. Being on an Imperial ship and touching an Imperial cogitator would be seen by some traditionalist tech briefs as tech heresy in and of itself. Whereas the reverse could also be true. An Imperial just walking around with an Eldar shuriken pistol could also be perceived as straight up tech heresy, especially if they were resisting giving that important Xenos artifact over to the Adeptus Mechanicus, who are shouting at them to hand it over, por favor. That's on the more extreme end. The more severe version of tech heresy comes with manipulation. And it's manipulation specifically of what the Adeptus Mechanicus see as holy. The blessed machine, the motive force, the various pieces of arcane technology and knowledge that allow the galaxy, as the Mechanicus see it, to continue in its operation, and of course keep them in their own minds on top. Messing with these things, interfering, taking apart, trying to service, or God forbid, trying to reverse engineer Imperial technology that bears the stamp of the Adeptus Mechanicus may as well be a death sentence for the individual who tries it. However, on a planetary level, that's when it comes a little bit harder to dictate, because if the Adeptus Mechanicus finds that there is a trend of this type of tech heresy, maybe at a low level, maybe at a level that could be acceptable if it wasn't too big of a problem, then there's a little bit more treading, a little bit more politics involved. You can't just shoot the random guy in the head because he decided to take open a radio and try and take it apart and put it back together again. And it's being done on a planetary scale with multiple factories taking Adeptus Mechanicus technology and retrofitting it in some way. They have to disagree rather than just execute for that type of tech heresy, because at that point it would be massive casualties, likely on both sides, but irrelevant. We'll get to that in a little bit. The next one is illegal misuse of patent. Now, I've talked about the Adeptus Mechanicus giving out patents before. Now, a patent for the Adeptus Mechanicus is essentially an outsourcing of their technological knowledge. It's not a patent exactly how we think of it in, say, the 20th century, where you would give a full design to an Imperial world and just expect them to produce it from scratch. What usually works out with Mechanicus patents is they come in two forms. Either a planet is granted the entire blueprint, so they're given the ability to make it from scratch, except the Forge manages to or not manages, but agrees to build a certain component or piece for it that is necessary for its operation. And now, if it was tanks, the planet may know how to make the body of the tank, the hull of the tank, the weaponry that's involved, other than the main gun, the engine, and the electronics. And then at the end of the process, when the guns are in, all except the primary gun, the hull is done, everything has been built, the Adeptus Mechanicus come in with a shipment of gun barrels and engines, they install them, and then they slap the Forge's mark on them, making it so these are now Adeptus Mechanicus produced tanks, but they are from a standard Imperial world that is not under the thrall of the AdMech whatsoever. A good example of this is Hive Tertium on Atoma. You actually notice that in the production line there are very few production parts for weapons and ammunition. Only hulls and turrets are generally easy to see. And even on the ones that you do see on the production line, most of them only have their secondary weapons. This would be a great example, as the AdMech are probably holding on to the designs for the primary gun, the internal electronics, the fuel, and the engine, so that Atoma can't just go off on its own and have Tertium provide the Imperium with Lehman Russ tanks using a Mechanicus patented design. This can be a little bit problematic because, of course, if you create a local engine design or anything of that nature, you could theoretically still make the tanks, but the AdMech and pretty much everyone else would agree that that is an inferior solution. Now, the other reason that they do patents, and the other more direct way, is essentially they give you the most simple outline possible. We need you to make this part or this section of the vehicle. If it is the gun, then you just make the gun. If it is the hull, then you just make the hull. And then they come in and they take that from you, they ship it back to the Forge, and then they assemble it at home. So you can consider the patents to go one of two ways. Either you're making a specific piece of patented technology that is then shipped back to the Forge. Essentially, they outsource a part of the production to you and then they bring it back home to assemble, or it's the opposite. They're the ones assembling the important components in the forge, and then you're assembling everything else, and then they come in, put the one part in, slap their logo on it, and say, good and done. And you can sell it straight from your world, which is even better for your economy. Now, illegal misuse of patent. I think I've already touched on some of it. It's taking this design that the AdMech have lent you and misusing it. Either you're producing too many, you're producing too few, you're modifying them illegally, you are caught trying to analyze the design, make copies of it, make forms to continue producing it in future, or producing it in secret. This is often a thing. The AdMech will send people to oversee the main production line. If those people catch a whiff, usually it's a priest and adepts, if those people catch a whiff that there are other designs of a similar bent elsewhere on the world that they didn't see roll off the assembly line, that's going to be a hold up, pause, hold work. Where did this vehicle come from? It does not have my stamp of approval. Somebody in some workshop made this, and it's an infringement on patent because you can't legally make this without my oversight. So it's an oversight thing more than anything. Now, on the one hand, that could be completely innocuous. They could have just missed it. It could have been an accident. There could be lots of production lines making them at different speeds. There's a lot of complicated stuff to manufactorums and industrial worlds that make it difficult for the AdMech to really look at every single thing at the same exact time. There are tens of billions of people working on these lines and only maybe 20 or 30 tech priests in total at the same time on one imperial world. However, it has another nefarious purpose. What if this vehicle was tainted? What if it is somehow cursed? What if it was produced in secret by an underground cabal or cult? What if it's some sort of tracking device from another forge? They have to worry about these things, as there is a lot of infighting within the AdMech overall. And then, finally, as expected, abuse of resource or abuse of labor contracts or pacts. The Adeptus Mechanicus are vehement self-promoters, and they do not deal with raw deals very easily. They chafe under any concept that they may be getting the short end of the stick. You, on your regular world, think that you're making a good deal for yourself, when in reality, the AdMech are looking at you very, very angry at the fact that they think you're trying to screw them, and that can lead to some unfortunate disagreements. However, of course, let's start off specifically with how the AdMech deal with minor and major beef amongst themselves. Let's go with the progression of this, and it's going to be a progression on both ones because it's kind of a cycle in some cases. The first, of course, is that aforementioned disagreement between priests. You are an electro priest, you are a different type of priest from a different forge. You think that the motive force is powered by electricity, and you believe that the Omnissiah's greatest weapon and power is electricity, and the electro priests are the most holy of ordos. That's your opinion. My opinion is that the glory of radiation, the rad cleansing, the beautiful Scutari of the Reductor, all of these different specialists who focus on radiation, they are in fact the power of the Omnissiah. And I have my arguments based up on long history of my forge and my people and my folk, and you have your history of long history on your forge and your people and your folk, and we disagree, probably rather publicly, arguing over the noon sphere and making big angry gestures with our various claws and our mechadendrites shouting in binary like we're trying to yell over each other. It's a mess, but it's still a minor disagreement. Nobody's dead. Yet. But this can escalate. If we don't reach an amicable conclusion, sometimes those tensions do one of two things. They either flare, I swing my axe at you, or they simmer. We both leave dissatisfied and upset with your sect and my sect not getting along anymore. However, in either way, in either case, if there's a flare-up and we both go at each other and maybe somebody gets hurt, maybe somebody doesn't, the policing on the Forge world can generally split up a pair of tech priests and be like, okay, you go to your corner, you go to your corner, I don't want to see any more of this shit in the street, it makes us look bad, it makes us look like idiots, shame on you for doing this, finger wagging and police putting you away for a minute. However, in either case, even if they simmer, they tend to be dealt with internally. And what do I mean by internally? I mean that there is some level of mediation done within the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, on some cases, if it's an actual priest and not some adept beefing with a random other adept, if it's an actual priest with some serious pull and clout, that internal investigation can be quite quick and nasty. The idea is essentially somebody, if it's the fabricator for your world, the archmagos, whoever is in charge of you, if you're getting investigated by this guy, well, if he's on your side, if you both agree that electricity is the glory of the motive force and the Omnissiah is best served by its ranking, well, you dogmatically agree. You're certainly not going to find each other liable for this disagreement, and you're going to push all the blame onto that radiation cuck over there. It's just going to be a back and forth on the simmer side, and, well, both sides will try to self-justify, and that's the unfortunate part of the next step. Self-justification. The Adeptus Mechanicus are, as mentioned, dogmatic, traditionalist, conservative. The extremists, the progressives, those individuals who go against the mold are either powerful enough to do so on their own, and thus are often relegated to being on their own, and others are simply sent away to a government black site where they will either succeed in finding something incredible or die in prison. Or just die in general as somebody decides to put a bullet in the back of their head. But this self-justification leads to neither side really coming to an agreement. I am not going to agree that my position is wrong. You are not going to agree that your position is wrong. And while this is happening, whether it's a public deposition, a private talking to, or whatever it may be, we are sniping at each other from across the forge. Maybe something that you needed for your workshop goes missing. Nobody knows where it went. I certainly am not responsible, but I'm really unfortunate that that happened to you, buddy. Really sucks that your wrench got bent in half. Man, so unfortunate if I ripped one of your mechadendrites out while you were sleeping. That would just be awful. But the other part is, apart from the metaphorical sniping and the sniping of materials or requirements for work, this can also change to a little bit more literal sniping. Let's say two tech priests are arguing, as mentioned before. They have many adepts under them, or even worse, if it's an archmagos arguing with another archmagos, they have many tech priests under them. And these tech priests certainly do agree and certainly are on the side of their leader and don't understand why you and your stupid followers just can't come around and see the truth. You are so foolish. And of course, while they are garbling in the frontal square and arguing about who is right and who is wrong, somebody blows a gasket, and all of a sudden, one of the tech priests gets shot in the head by a Scutari that is being data tethered by another tech priest on the other side. Now, the violence may end there, but one little killing can often lead to a couple more, and where there is less subtlety, it's more likely to lead to factionalization within the Forge. Now, they can be subtle. There are plenty of assassination units within the Adeptus Mechanicus. You have Rust Stalkers, you have other Sicarans, you have those big, long, leggy boy snipers. You have many different ways to kill a fellow tech priest if you really, really think that that's going to prove your point once and for all, so to speak. However, the real problem is when we start getting factions forming. Those forges that break into factionalism, or even worse, the forges that have factions separate from each other. So, one group of Ordo Reductor and another group of Ordo Reductor on two different forges. Or the Mars chapter of the Archaeoflagellants versus the Agrippina chapter of Archaeoflagellants. They disagree on something. Crap. They can't come together and deal with this. Their forges are not going to be able to deal amicably on an even footing. Mars, as I said, is always at the advantage, and every other forge comparing themselves to Mars is going to be constantly comparing themselves to others and making sure that they are much better, quote-unquote, culturally, diplomatically, and traditionally. So, this leads to isolated clashes between followers on both sides. Not the individual sniping or the murders in town square that we saw before, nothing subtle about these. This is we both deploy to a battlefield and openly get engaged. Now, this is not something planned ahead of time, it's not performative, and it's not necessarily even organized in any real way. We just happen to have multiple groups from multiple forges, which often happens because, of course, everyone has their own charges and jobs to look after, whether it be in the Imperial Guard, as part of shipments, as part of the tithe. Random groups of the Adeptus Mechanicus will bump into each other on occasion, and if they happen to be part of a long-standing beef, which, as you can see, lasts up to, well, several hundred years, they can end up killing each other. This is often seen by the Imperials as like, what the absolute fuck is going on? The Admech just boarded one of their own ships and started killing each other. Well, what the normal humans, the Imperials, don't know is one ship is full of X type of tech priest or leadership or even followers from one forge, and the other ship is full of followers, tech priests, or adepts from another forge, or even from another faction within the same forge. They don't get along. They decide that the best way to solve their issues is with violence. Good old-fashioned violence. It always works, am I right? I cannot condone. However, it is not uncommon for the Admech to just default to, nope, you gotta die. You're wrong. You're wrong. Shut up. You're dead now. Very simple. And this process, the progression of minor disagreement to open warfare and limited clashes, can repeat for hundreds of years. There are long cycles and extremely long grudges within the Adeptus Mechanicus. And of course, because priests last one hell of a long time, it means that they can carry on grudges as long as they gosh darn want to, and they hand off those same prejudices to their followers and their adepts, who then become priests with the same hatreds and prejudices. It's great. It's a long process of stabbing each other in the back and occasionally in the face. Now, a much simpler process, and I gotta say, I love this image. It's I believe, yeah, it's an Armageddon Steel Legionary being lectured by a tech priest. I assume for misusing his gas mask, which is hilarious. But what do the Admech do about minor or major beef with the Imperium? Well, again, we have another progression here, but it's a lot less violent and aggressive than it is with the rest of the Admech. Within the Admech, they can have a lot of personal beef and gripes that escalate directly because they have the same dogma, the same religion. The Imperials don't believe in the same stuff, and the Admech know that, and they know that, well, they just believe a different thing. They don't understand why I'm mad at them. I have to do a little more to actually make that obvious. Now, this is outside of the realm where a tech priest just sees a guardsman or sees an Imperial citizen doing something illegal, obviously illegal, like taking apart a radio and trying to fix it themselves, or beating up on a servitor or something, something that is like, you're directly disrespecting the Adeptus Mechanicus, you're doing something that's both illegal on your planet and illegal in my dogma. You're an individual, I'm just going to shoot you at worst, or at best, I'm going to physically arrest you and take you off to be tried in Mechanicus court, which basically same outcome, you're going to get turned into a servitor instead of just shot. Now, outside of those situations, which are very isolated and honestly not too common, because how often does a tech priest just walk around an Imperial hive watching the locals do things? It's not very common, and even adepts aren't necessarily going to react that violently, especially if they're local. This is often a thing I like to point out. Adepts come from Imperial worlds much of the time, especially if they're expected to serve out their lives on an Imperial world. If you have a planet that makes engines or that makes cars, they don't necessarily need 40 or 50 tech priests all around. This is not arcane technology. This is not complicated shit. In many cases, the Admech are barely even providing anything technologically to this world, but they need to oversee it because it's technology. Even if the engine is a local engine, it's still an engine. Even if the bodywork and the machinery are still locally designed and locally built, they're still technology, and somebody's got to look after that stuff. So, adepts are raised. Now, I do say raised, as in a population from the world is requested or taken by the Adeptus Mechanicus, usually with the permission of the planetary government, and honestly, in many cases, they're volunteers because it's a very great offer of service, labor, work, and benefits, and they're brought back to the Forge world. They are properly educated, they are re-indoctrinated, they are taught how to be adepts, and then the best of them will remain at the Forge. The rest will be returned to their homeworld to serve the same purpose that a priest would, except they are less important, less aggressive, and considerably more understanding of the local population. This is often a thing that I disagree with a lot of AdMech fans is the Adeptus Mechanicus have a very strong dogma. Yes, on their Forge worlds, they do. Outside of that, in the rest of the Imperium, if there is not an understanding between the idea of the AdMech believe one thing, the Imperium believes something else, or the Imperium understands another way, there would be so much more, practically an unreasonable and an unsustainable amount of conflict between the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium of Man. Now, it is a taboo thing for Imperials to try and take on anything extremely technological or complex. You wouldn't see an Imperial trying to build a computer, for example. You wouldn't even really see them trying to build a servitor without prior knowledge and understanding of how that technology works. Now, you don't need to be an adept to know how that technology works. You can put together a combustion engine if you have the right materials and equipment, but the best way to do that is to work on the assembly lines and work with the Adeptus Mechanicus. This is where local adepts come in. Essentially, it's the idea of a backwoods hick Imperial adept. They are the greasy mechanic when compared to the automotive engineer in the Adeptus Mechanicus. So you could compare a genuine tech priest from a Forge world, that's your automotive engineer. He knows exactly how the car works because he's read the science, he went to college, he knows exactly what he's doing. And then you have the greaseball mechanic from some random auto repair shop. He's a local, he's friendly, he knows the people in the neighborhood. He does oil changes for free for old ladies because he knows that they can't pay for it. When these two get together, which one do you think is going to be more effective at actually helping people on the local world to set up what the AdMech want? Now, the tech priest may know what they want, he may have the intention to know what they want, he may have the ability and the authority to do all these things, but if he doesn't know that these people need these considerations or have this cultural taboo, it's going to ruin his plans, even if he just sticks to his doctrine and does all the right things. You can make all the right moves as the Adeptus Mechanicus, but if you have a culture that you're dealing with that is so far divorced from your own, culturally, doctrinally, even like personally, not understanding as much about technology or about the Adeptus Mechanicus, you are doomed to fail without some local who knows what is going on. And these locals are more understanding. They have a concept of this is local custom. This is local conservatism. If you have an idea that you need to set up on this planet a plant, an energy relay, information sharing, technology, recruiting for labor, an off-world tech priest is going to be like a sledgehammer, where instead a local is going to be a scalpel. And the Adeptus Mechanicus know this. They don't want to be inefficient. They don't want to have their contracts fucked up. They don't want to be constantly persecuting people because those people don't understand why they're being persecuted. The local adept is an incredibly important go-between, and he's basically a ubiquitous staple on every single Imperial world, barring like death worlds and places where there's just not a population that uses technology at all. Now, there is an even lower one than the local adept who gets trained by the Mechanicus for a short period of time and then comes back home. That is essentially the really, really local grease monkey, like an actual mechanic or a local engineer. Now, a lot of them are structural engineers. They're not going to be into the technology all in all, but that's an entirely different thing for another day. Sorry. Tangent. Important tangent. I have to say, important tangent. One of my most important arguments is this whole dichotomy between the AdMech and the locals, but that is a tangent nonetheless. How do we deal with problems? Maybe problems that arise from those local adepts not being present or not being properly utilized by the Forge. Well, the first one, again, if we're not dealing with an individual infraction, we're dealing with a large infraction, almost a planet-wide infraction. Official recognition of complaint from a representative. A tech priest or a Forge adept sees, okay, this is going to be a problem. Something is going wrong. There's an infringement. There's a patent problem. There's a resource problem. There's a labor problem. There's a culture issue not gelling between the AdMech and the Imperials. Maybe it's an actual crime. Maybe it's just a perceived problem that might lead to criminal activity in the future. So he sends back an official complaint to his forge. This takes a very short period of time. Goes back and forth from the astropaths in couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, depending on the distance between the forge. So there's an official complaint from a representative. Then there's a review and a confirmation from the AdMech, the Adeptus Mechanicus, both on their forge world, and honestly, if it's a subsidiary, it might be from their official forge world as well. They review the complaint, they confirm that it might be a problem, they confirm that they have received enough data to tell them that this is going on, and then it is sent on to the Imperium of Man. The Adeptus Mechanicus at this point can stop the complaint and say, here's what you need to fix, change it in this way, we're sending you a local, we're sending you assistance, fix it, this is not going to be something that we really need to bring to the Imperium, it can be solved on the local level. We don't need to bring anyone else into it, because bringing other people into it is not what the Adeptus Mechanicus want to do. They would rather adjust the process, not really adjust it, not revolutionize it, not make any real progress here. Just, okay, here's a workaround that we know is functional and will serve exactly the purpose that we want while completing this thing. For example, if you wanted to set up a car factory on an Imperial world, and the Imperials really, really don't like that there's a coal power plant right next to a bunch of orphanages. Well, the Adeptus Mechanicus will see, okay, that's a complaint, they're picketing outside the forge, and we don't want any of this. Here, move the gas relay, move the coal stacks a couple of miles away from the orphanages. It's barely any work, it's done by the locals anyway, it makes them happy, it doesn't interfere with our labor, and it really doesn't change the process all that much whatsoever. It practically has no change to the process, we've just dealt with something that could be a local problem in future. It increases the overall efficiency of the process without actually changing the process, which is exactly what the Adeptus Mechanicus want. They want to get better, they want to do better, they want to improve their own capabilities without actually revolutionizing anything. It doesn't have to change as long as we make it better without massive difference in the actual process that we do to get there. However, if it is going to be a problem that is going to require Imperial speak and such, they will forward this complaint to the Imperials. Now, of course, it goes first to the planetary government, and then, as an extension, they will usually share it with the Adeptus Administratum, and sometimes the Munitorum, depending upon the situation. Now, this petition will usually be in the Adeptus Mechanicus' own language. It will be, here's the problem that we're facing, your local people or your local society, or sometimes even the local governor, is not cooperating the way that he should be, or the way that they should be. So, generally, the Imperium will find a way around this. They are even more flexible than the Adeptus Mechanicus, and if it takes moving an entire population away from the area, or excoriating a certain sect of angry individuals, they'll do it. The Adeptus Mechanicus don't even have to raise their hand at that point. They know that the Imperium will gladly accommodate them if it means that this goes through smoothly and there are no more extreme requests from the AdMech as a whole. However, there are a couple of problems with this, and that is that continued infractions can lead to sanctions. Now, why would you continue to have infractions in this scenario? The Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus have both said this is a bad thing. Let's go back to our car plant. They've made the change. They've put the coal plant silos a couple of miles distant from the orphanage, and the orphans have been moved out by the local planetary government. Okay, fine. The locals aren't too upset, but they're still not happy. There is a labor strike immediately. Essentially, the people are just upset that this plant is being built in the first place. They don't understand why it's happening. The industrialization isn't really something that they like. They're on a planet that they consider civilized, and so a car plant goes against that in their minds, or even it could be a feudal world and they just don't like it. There's some local problem, and the Adeptus Mechanicus are not getting along. The problem that initially had cropped up at stage 1 of this is becoming more and more of a problem. People are throwing rocks, milks and eggs and things into the factory. It's messing with the workers. The workers who are from the local world are getting harassed. It's an interesting thing. The Adeptus Mechanicus could actually want to protect the local population because that's their workforce. A happy, comfortable workforce does better work a large portion of the time. Now, on a Forge world, you don't have to worry about that because you don't have any other options, and that's the life that everyone lives. On that case, I understand the Adeptus Mechanicus are as brutal and as slave driverish as they need to be. But on many local worlds, they would benefit, in fact, they do benefit, from having comfortable, effective workers. And much of that is done through just paying them an unbelievable amount in comparison to whatever local work offers them. But if these people aren't happy anyway, if they're getting harassed on the way into work, if their houses or even their brand new company cars are getting lit on fire or broken into, it's going to be more problems, and the Adeptus Mechanicus will log each of these and move on to sanctioning the planet. Now, an Adeptus Mechanicus sanction is not a sanction in the way that the Imperium sanctions worlds. It's not a blockade or a removal of authority. It is a direct bargaining tactic. Essentially, you were providing this problem. Until you make it go away, you will not receive X or Y services from the Adeptus Mechanicus. Essentially, you are blacklisted until you make the problem go away. And this, if the planetary governor was, say, a little bit too indulgent with his population and wasn't willing to bring the hammer down, this rapidly brings you out of your stupor because it's like, okay, hold up. If the AdMech pull out all of their support and supplies for us right now, we are in a bad way. I can't get fuel. I can't get supplies. I can't get maintenance. Even the local adepts who are probably going to stay on my world and try and hold things together, they're probably not capable or really equipped for this level of separation from the Adeptus Mechanicus. But it is just the first step. Sanctions can be light or they can be very heavy. On the very heavy end, you get Adeptus Mechanicus military presence on your world, and you can also get complete and utter removal of all AdMech services. Essentially, everything is going to break down until you solve the problem. And this is kind of the breaking point. Most Imperial worlds will give up long before. If they had some actual resistance to the Adeptus Mechanicus being there, they would give up long before this point. Sanctions are a make or break for a lot of worlds. If they were on the edge of rebellion or sedition, sanctions can be like, okay, are we doing this or are we not doing this? Because the AdMech is the first one to really test us as far as our mettle for secession can be. And this is why sanctions often become assassination or violence. The Adeptus Mechanicus holding their iron claw around the throat of an Imperial world is not a good look for the locals. It does not feel great to know that one of the God Emperor's Adeptus has it out for your planet in particular. They don't understand. They're locals. Aren't we godly enough? Aren't we religious enough? Don't we pay the tithe enough? Don't we add enough value? Aren't we people with the rights and authority granted to us by the God Emperor? Well, if there is uprising, if there is overturning, or even if there is popular support, say the planetary governor says, yeah, the Adeptus Mechanicus are in the wrong here. We are doing the right thing for our people. I'm not going to stop the riots. I'm not going to stop the violence. I'm not going to stop the eggings and the muggings and the theft and the property damage. I'm not going to stop it. Maybe I'll even encourage it. Maybe I'll send the PDF to keep those rioters safe while they go and destroy your business. Maybe they think that'll solve the problem. Maybe they just haven't really realized what situation they're in quite yet. But this becomes assassination and violence quite quickly. A planetary governor who openly speaks out against the Adeptus Mechanicus, calling them slave drivers and absolute destroyers of the planet and enemies of the people, are very likely to find themselves executed on a certain period of time afterward, or maybe even mid-speech if the AdMech feel like being gaudy. And now the question is that illegal? Is that a crime? Well, Not according to the Adeptus Mechanicus, and of course, the classic instance of we have conducted a thorough internal review and have decided that we did nothing wrong definitely applies here. You gotta remember, the AdMech police themselves, and while they can be brought to heel by the Imperium at large in various levels, and of course they can more easily be brought to negotiate by the withholding of various things that they need, they are also quite capable of independent operations, such as assassinations or even small violent outbreaks. There are times where Adeptus Mechanicus groups or fleets or individual ground armies have deployed to planets that are in open revolt, targeting them specifically, and reinforce their defenses. They have taken up positions around their own production hubs in order to defend them, because that is defense of their property. The locals may have built it, the locals may have staffed it, the locals may have worked there, and the locals may have been producing for themselves, and yet it was all stamped by the Mechanicus, which means, in Minds of the Mechanicus, they own it all. And sometimes they are even legally justified in doing so. But this is how violence can break out. At any point in this process, it can stop. It can turn right around, and there can be a compromise on one or both or either side. However, there is an ultimate ending, and it's hard feelings versus the need for support. On the one hand, most Imperial worlds cannot operate for long periods of time without a lot of prep time, without any Adeptus Mechanicus support. If it just shut off the next day, they would probably only have a period of a couple of years to try and reorganize and set themselves back up again. Now, that's without Adeptus Mechanicus support. If there was actual sanctioning, in addition to the lack of support, in addition to the initial sanctions, if there was military action on the planet, if there was some sort of barricade or blockade from the Imperial Navy, if a planet goes full rogue, for example, they might have even less than a couple of years, but most of the time they have enough equipment and support to at least last a couple of years. Some of them can last for decades without Imperial Mechanicus support, because they are either more self-sustaining, more capable, or have managed to trap, coerce, or convinced more Adeptus Mechanicus ex-members to join them in resisting the effects of the tech priests. And of course, that is also related to hard feelings. Now, if you come back into the fold and back into the good graces of the Mechanicus, they are petty. They are not friendly and convivial when you come groveling back asking for the sanctions to end. They are dicks about it, almost 100% of the time. While it might not be in their best interest, they have won, and they are going to let you know that. And so those hard feelings can reach fever pitches at times. Times where planetary governors just say, maybe I should have kicked you guys out. Maybe I should have gone full rogue and let my population tear you to shreds. Maybe I should have called in my military to try and put you down while you were still in small numbers. Because now you're interfering with my autonomy, my authority, and often the Adeptus Mechanicus will try and steal Imperial worlds outright after an uprising like this. If the Adeptus Mechanicus can claim enough damages and support, and the Administratum is not in the planet's corner, they can sometimes find themselves entirely subjugated by the Adeptus Mechanicus, as they worm their way politically and monetarily into every part of the planet's infrastructure, and it becomes, by extension, if not legally, a simple subsidiary of a Forge world. Not even necessarily in name, just in nature. So those are the two sides of the coin. On one side, you want to come back to the table. On the other side, the table is now covered in barbed wire, and the other person on the other side is incredibly happy to rub your face in broken glass to make sure that you know you lost. So, can kind of push some people over the edge at a certain point, unsurprisingly. How do I not piss off the AdMech? How do I not even want to get into this progression bullshit? How do I not get into this nuclear arms race with this hyper-technologically focused faction? Well, I have 5, maybe 6 major tips. The first one is be reasonable with the Adeptus Mechanicus with your demands, and always check with the Administratum. The Adeptus Mechanicus are going to ask you for impossible things. all of the time. They do it all the time. Can you rise up a new hive within the next 10 years that's going to serve zero purpose other than to be areas for our factories to work? Can you create a mega highway or a new starport in a very ludicrously short period of time? The Adeptus Mechanicus, usually, in terms of actual forge priests, think that the rest of the Imperium works like they do, works at the same pace that they do, and has the same understanding and capabilities for technology, engineering, design, and creation that the Mechanicus do. This is almost never the case. I mean, on Manufactorum, Industrial Worlds, War Worlds, maybe they might have the same headspace, but on Hive Worlds, Feudal Worlds, Civilized Worlds, Feral Worlds, not going to happen. It's impossible. And you can't just say to the priest, no, that's impossible, even if it is straight up impossible. Negotiate. Be reasonable. They want this thing. Ask them why. They will often be glad to tell you at length why it's necessary. And if you can think, oh, so you just need a train that goes from A to B, and in your mind, a raised highway is the best way to do that. Well, I can tell you, because I'm a local, there is a way to build underground in such and such an area, and we can build a much cheaper location for you that will serve the same purpose. Great, we've reached a bargain, we're on the same page, and I don't have to do something insane or ask my population to do something insane, and you get what you want, Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, what if they can't agree to it? What if there's no compromise possible? Get the Administratum involved, because what is negative here is that you can't let yourself be pushed around by the AdMech, but at the same time, you can't push back. You always have to be surreptitious and political about what ground you give up to the Adeptus Mechanicus. If they win on one issue, maybe they're not allowed to win on the next one. And the best way to do this without really getting yourself in trouble is call on the Adeptus Administratum. The Administratum is technically in charge of your world. They are the ones, co-signing a lot of your political decisions. They're the ones who decide on the government system of your world, so they have an implicit bias towards you. In addition to that, as long as you're on the right side of the tithe, you can always make the banger claim. Now, the banger claim, or what I call the most important argument, is X or Y will negatively affect the tithe. Big important word that you need to say to the Administratum, the Munitorum, all of those folks, and immediately the Adeptus Mechanicus are in a worse bargaining place. If whatever they're doing, even if overall it's a good thing or sanctioned by the Administratum, is going to cause negative reactions in the tithe network, it's a ripple effect. It has massive connotations for many worlds beyond the purview of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And as long as you can justify it and make it reasonable, say, well, if they built this overland highway, it would ruin our production of crops. It's going to shade certain areas, and it's going to drop the tithe by about 10% over the 10 years that they want us to produce this. Well, a 10% reduction in food, that's unacceptable. And now it's not you arguing against the Adeptus Mechanicus, it's the Administratum dealing with the Adeptus Mechanicus trying to do something unreasonable. At that point, you put forth your petition and say, well, we would gladly help the Adeptus Mechanicus, and we think that their idea is a great one. We just came up with this one little modification that won't affect the tithe, and that will come into effect very easily, and we can do this instead. And the AdMech, of course, had already rejected that plan, but perhaps the agreement of the Adeptus Administratum or various other imperial forces will either get them to relent or get them to provide you more services. Perhaps instead of it taking 10 years with only your population servicing the bridge, maybe they begrudgingly offer you some more tech priests and some more heavy equipment, and it'll only take 5 years. The Administratum says, I can deal with a 5-year famine on a couple of different worlds. Go right ahead with the plan. Plan goes right ahead, Adeptus Mechanicus get what they want, you get what you want, Administratum doesn't have to sweat too badly about it, problem solved. The next one is retain resources and valuable information at all costs as useful bargaining chips. Now this is one of my absolute favorites. The Adeptus Mechanicus are well known for putting all and everything in their mind aside in exchange for the most important and juicy things to the order of the AdMech: information, knowledge, designs, technology, and rare resources. If you happen across a couple of locations that would be important for the Adeptus mechanics, let's say that you came across an asteroid field that was rich in adamantium ore or ceramide ore, well, best not to put that on the open market just yet. Best not to speak too loudly of it. Better just identify where that is, and perhaps the next time that I'm doing a deal with the Adeptus Mechanicus, I'll just offhandedly mention, oh, and we found a whole bunch of adamantium ore veins on this planetoid out in the distance. If only we could share its location with you, perhaps this deal could be a little bit sweeter for us, and then maybe we'll send you those coordinates. Not a moment before, but once we sign on this deal, we'll figure it out for you. And that'll often work. Another great one is, while the Adeptus Mechanicus can claim and grab any technology that they happen to find unattended, if you have technology that they don't, say STCs, important xenotech, anything of that nature, offering it up to them as a gift, a bribe, for lack of a better word, is also a very good way to go from random Imperial to that one Imperial that helped us out really well last time, and let's deal with him. Now, if you're a businessman, that is a great thing. You want the Adeptus Mechanicus as a well-paying and incredibly well-mannered, well, sometimes, official patron. If you work on a planet that is a mining world and you own one of the mining hives, you don't want the Adeptus Mechanicus going to your competition. Maybe you save up all the best parts of the ore from the entire world and you gift them to the local forge world every now and then. The Adeptus Mechanicus, while not vain in the traditional sense, certainly do view a lot of these gifts and bargaining chips as blessings from their god in a lot of cases. So, buttering them up with some extra bargaining chips is a perfectly reasonable way to not tick them off, even if you're about to ask for something that you know is going to tick them off. The next one, of course, is related to the Administratum one: request mediation from other priests or imperial officials. Like I said, there are factions and disagreements within the Mechanicus as a whole. If you know that Tech Priest A beefs with Tech Priest B, and you send a message through a neutral adept, hey, Tech Priest B, Tech Priest A is being a dick, can you come and mediate for us? He can talk to his Archmagos or his Archfabricator if he's a Magos himself, and then come and argue amongst each other and decide upon what it should be. Oftentimes, out of pure spite, Tech Priest B will just disagree with Tech Priest A and say, I can do this better because I am better than this guy. And at that point, you're getting the Mechanicus internal dialogue, their internal disagreements, to actually work in your favor, which is great. Big ups there. The other one, of course, is use other Imperial officials. If you, as the planetary governor, cannot keep the Adeptus Mechanicus peacefully and socially from bulldozing a church, maybe it's time to call on the Ecclesiarchy and the Ministorum and ask them, hey, can you come tell this tech priest that this is an actual holy site that they're trying to bulldoze? Can you let them know that they're not allowed to do this? And while it may be a completely pointless argument to the Adeptus Mechanicus, what do you mean it's a holy site? It's just a golden church. This isn't a church to the Omnissiah. This isn't a machine factory or a shop to the motive force. The Ecclesiarch is certainly willing to stand out in front of that picket line and say, we have more money than you and a lot more people than you. You get your metal keister away from my cathedral. It happens. Those disagreements often then go to mediation at the highest levels, the Adeptus Terra, etc., and then they are resolved. Whether it goes your way or doesn't, you're just going to have to find out, local planetary governor. If you're going to do something illegal, use as many locals as you can and be quiet about it. If you're going to do something, if you're planning to do something illegal, whether it's produce illegal arms for your PDF, illegally produce weapons for any faction that you'd like to name, or be an actual seditious bastard and turn to the side of chaos and you want tanks in order to do that, Be quiet and use as many locals as possible. Trustworthy local adepts or trustworthy local mechanics. I mean, these people are willing to work with you more than they're willing to work with the Adeptus Mechanicus if it is the fact that the Mechanicus are treating the planet unfairly. If there is disagreement between the group that are on your world and the group on another world, or even more reasonably, if there is a faction of the same forge that has different adepts with differing opinions, you could most definitely say, guys, let's be honest. Tech Priest A is a dick. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's making a mess of this arrangement, and he's ruining it for you and for us. All agreed, all round. Everybody's of the same opinion there. Now, to solve this problem, I would say this. Let's do a trial run, guys. Now, what is a trial run? I have a section of the Underhive that I've cleared out, and I'm going to give you guys, because I trust you so much and I believe in your local sensibilities and your superior understanding of the dogma of the Adeptus Mechanicus, you're going to set up your own factory with beer and hookers and blackjack and hookers, and whatever you want to do down there to produce what he's producing up there, I want you to do it. You're going to be quiet about it. We're not going to show any of this production off, but if he makes any claims about him being the best, if he makes any claims about his being the superior ones, well, I can bring out the ones that you guys stamped for me for the Adeptus Mechanicus, and, well, we'll just see how well his agreement holds up in court. It doesn't matter how outraged he is, as long as it's being overseen by the Adeptus Mechanicus, officially or unofficially, I can theoretically argue that you did a bad job if my version is superior. Now, of course, that is a nuclear move. Undoubtedly, it is something that could get all of you in severe trouble and possibly executed. But even in that case, there is a distinct fuck you energy that comes along with, look at these scrap Hulk tanks that I produced in the Underhive using your underlings under your very nose, and they are so much better than the ones that you managed to make in the factory which everyone hates. There's a lot of energy in that, and it can carry some weight legally as well, because if you can prove to the Forge that Tech Priest A is an absolute dimwit by saying that, look what these local adepts cooked up using the same design and the same requirements in half the time with a quarter of the resources, well, that makes a lot of difference, because it shows, or at least it could show, that the priest is not doing his job very well, and could theoretically let you off the hook for the little bit of minor tech heresy that you just committed. So, the last thing, and one of the most important ones, is preparing for sanctions. Understanding that dealing with the Adeptus Mechanicus can be volatile, can be confusing. Honestly, the biggest thing that the Imperials struggle with is understanding what the hell is going on. It is confusing. These people make no sense. They speak in beeps and boops. They're talking about the motive force when they're looking at a light bulb. It's a lot of weird shit going on with these people. So you gotta understand. Prep for the sanctions, and always remember, state proofing is key. Now, if you don't know what the concept of state proofing is, it is the idea that you are creating things and organizing your society in such a way that it will resist the effects of an overall government shutdown or government-sponsored violence. If you are in a society that is habitually plagued by the overreaches of a tyrannical X or Y, in this case it's the Adeptus Mechanicus, you want the local community, the local system of government, the local system of values, the local infrastructure, to be as insulated or proof from state meddling as possible. In the case of the Adeptus Mechanicus, this means two things. One, do infiltrate those areas where the tech priests are working, organize people who can spy on them, set up rings of individuals who can look in at their work, and genuinely try to steal and copy it. Now, you're going to get in trouble. People are going to get shot. That's okay. If it's on the individual level, it can be done quietly, and those people are just unfortunately going to have to be martyrs for the state. But the goal is that when those sanctions hit, you keep hitting the tithe successfully. There is nothing more embarrassing to the Adeptus Mechanicus than them pulling out of a planet where they thought they were really needed and wanted, and then that planet continuing to succeed in spite of their absence. There's nothing that will bring them back to the negotiating table, and honestly, back with a vengeance to the idea of not conciliating and, in a lot of cases, wanting in-depth investigation. They won't just be austere and try and choke you out. No, now they're back involved because you just showed them up in their own turf. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same. Any tank produced with the Adeptus Mechanicus is going to be slightly inferior to the original article, no matter what patent or design you are using, but as long as you are an independent world, you can give it a shot, and there are plenty of off-brand or even off-the-shelf designs that can be used as substitutes, and theoretically, if it gratifies the administratum and you're not necessarily committing tech heresy, then it is possible for you to fully state-proof yourself from the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus aren't going to like that, because it means that they lose a lot of the leverage that they have over your world, but it brings them back to the negotiating table even if you've been sanctioned completely by them for something else that you've done. So, a new vote is up for you folks. I put up a little while ago for what videos we wanted to do. I have a lot of new projects getting started in addition to that homebrew video, which is really great. I've been so happy with the submissions thus far. That one's going to be a long time in the works. There were several other videos that I was working on, some more adversaries campaigns. Thank you all very much for enjoying those. And for our 500 subscriber mark, that stream and all the other stuff was great. I was also glad to get this video out on time. Credit for the artwork, of course, goes to GW, Ivan Kilmenko, Sam Mulaney, Nicholas K, Nick Danova, Christian Otsu, Mosa, who I love Mosa, and Marin Capoli. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot coming up, and I'm going to be getting much busier in the next couple of weeks as things go on, but I'm glad people have enjoyed the channel. More and more things will be added to it. We'll be slowly grinding through all the material that we had to do. I have 20 or 30 videos literally lined up. But I like the way that you guys have been choosing. It's been setting it up so I can do multiple videos picked at the same time. I'll pick the number 1 and the number 2 winner from our votes, do them in order, and then I'll add the 2 losers to the next week's vote. And I think that works perfectly fine so that we can get through everything. I know that a lot of people were hoping for more of a certain type of video or another X or Y type of video. Please put that down in the comments. I do take those into account, really, especially when it comes to scheduling. Like, if a lot of people are asking, hey, where's this? Like, hey, where's the Warhammer Fantasy tier videos? Or, hey, where's this lore video or that lore video? That stuff's going to be coming, but you have to ask for it because it's going to be like 19th or 20th on the list if it's been a couple of months since somebody asked. So just being aware of that, being aware again that this, as far as the AdBec goes, I'm not a genius. I'm definitely more on the imperial side of things in terms of technology, nomenclature. I also have that same, if you haven't watched me for a while, I have something called the diminution and the separation mentality with the Adeptus Mechanicus. Essentially minimize the areas where they are legally involved, maximize or diversify the amount of value and assets that they bring to the table in terms of the lore. So it's a very different thing. A lot of Adeptus Mechanicus folks like to think of themselves as equals to the Imperium of Man in every sense. Without them, the Imperium would fall apart. Without the Empire, they would reign supreme. I don't subscribe to that mentality, but that is just me. Everyone has their own opinion, obviously, and I would love to hear about your opinions in the comments. I know there will be disagreement with this video because, well, it's a video that I made, and that's what I love about it. I hope that I get to hear from you all soon, and I wish you all a lovely good night.